President Donald Trump may have just revealed something that could become one of the biggest Second Amendment battles in modern American history. A proposal that would allow law-abiding Americans to carry concealed firearms nationwide without needing a permit could be gaining support from the White House. Supporters say it's simply restoring a constitutional right, and critics say it would override state laws and spark years of legal challenges. And the interesting part is that this entire conversation started with just 4 words from President Trump.
Yeah, we're working on it.
So what exactly is he talking about, and what could it mean for gun owners across the country? Let's break it down. This week, President Donald Trump was speaking at the Mack Trucks facility in Pennsylvania when he recognized NRA President Bill Bockenberg in the audience. And during his remarks, Trump praised the NRA and said the organization supported him because he helped protect the Second Amendment.
Would I support the national right to carry legislation? How do you feel about national right to carry? National right to carry. Yeah, we're working on it.
Now, obviously, those 4 words don't create a law. They don't automatically change anything whatsoever. But they do suggest that the administration may be interested in pursuing some form of nationwide carry legislation. And that is massive. The timing is important because Senator Mike Lee of Utah introduced the National Constitutional Carry Act earlier this year, if you remember me talking about that in a previous video. And many believe that Trump's comments may have been referencing that proposal as well. So what exactly does that bill do? Well, the legislation would allow Americans who can legally possess firearms under federal law to carry concealed firearms throughout the United States without first obtaining a concealed carry permit. It would also prohibit states and local governments from imposing permit requirements and licensing fees and criminal penalties on otherwise lawful public carry. In simple terms, if you are legally allowed to own a firearm, you would no longer need government permission to carry concealed, which it's not even my opinion, that's the way it should be anyway. That's what the Second Amendment is all about. So why does this matter? This is where things get very interesting because the debate goes far beyond permits. Right now, firearm laws vary dramatically depending on where you live. In some states, obtaining a concealed carry permit is relatively simple, like where I live. Actually, we even went as far to make it a constitutional carry state. And in other states, the process can be expensive, time-consuming, and sometimes complicated. And many gun owners also face another challenge: travel. A permit that is valid in one state may not be recognized in another state. That means someone can be completely legal in their home state and unknowingly violate the law simply by crossing state lines. And supporters argue that constitutional rights shouldn't disappear when you leave your home state. They believe that the Second Amendment should work the same way other constitutional rights do, whether you're in Texas or Florida or Kansas or New York or even California. They argue the right should remain the same. For gun owners who travel frequently, this legislation could dramatically simplify the legal landscape. Now, for states with strict permitting systems, however, it could fundamentally change how firearm carry is regulated. And that is why both sides see this as a significant issue. This isn't the first time lawmakers have tried to create nationwide carry protection. Versions of national reciprocity legislation have been introduced for years. In fact, there have been multiple efforts in Congress to require states to recognize concealed carry permits issued by other states. And several of those proposals gained support, but ultimately failed to become law. One of the biggest challenges has always been balancing the federal authority with state authority. States have traditionally controlled many aspects of firearm regulations, and as a result, lawmakers often disagree about whether Congress should establish a national standard. At the same time, America has seen a major shift toward constitutional carry. Just a decade ago, permitless carry was relatively uncommon. Today, 29 states have adopted some form of constitutional carry, and that trend has significantly changed the conversation. What once seemed politically impossible is now being openly discussed at the national level. And that's one reason Trump's comments are receiving so much attention. So to understand why this debate matters, it's important to understand 2 Supreme Court decisions. The first is the Supreme Court's decision in the case of District of Columbia versus Heller. In that case, the court held that the Second Amendment protects an individual's right to possess firearms for lawful purposes such as self-defense. And that ruling fundamentally changed how courts viewed the Second Amendment. And the next one is something I'm sure that you have all heard of: New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruen. The decision also established a new legal standard for evaluating firearm regulations. Since Bruen, courts across the country have been re-examining numerous firearm restrictions, and supporters of nationwide constitutional carry often point to both Heller and Bruen as evidence that carrying firearms is a constitutional right that should not require government permission. Now, opponents disagree, and they want to argue that states will still have authority to regulate how public carry occurs within their borders. Now, this legal update would almost certainly become part of any court challenge. It's just inevitable. It's going to be put through the ringer. We know that. We expect that. So, let's look at some of the possibilities of what those arguments may be. Supporters argue that constitutional carry simply restores the original meaning of the Second Amendment. We believe, Americans should not need a permit to exercise a constitutional right. They also believe that nationwide carry protections would eliminate confusing state-to-state differences that currently create legal risk for travelers. And another common argument, it's consistency. Supporters believe constitutional rights should be protected equally regardless of where someone lives. Now, opponents see things differently, so let's talk about that for a second. One concern involves training requirements. Some states require firearm safety courses before issuing permits. Critics argue that eliminating permits could also eliminate incentives for training, and others raise concerns about states' rights. They argue that individual rights should contain authority to establish their own public carry policies rather than having a national standard imposed by Congress. Public safety concerns are also frequently cited by opponents who believe permit systems provide an additional layer of oversight. Now, regardless of where someone stands politically, there is no question that this proposal would generate absolutely intense debate. Now comes the big question: what happens from here? Best case scenario for supporters, the White House officially endorses the legislation. Congress advances the bill and the legislation passes both chambers and is signed into law. Worst case scenario for supporters, the bill never gains enough support to move forward and stalls in committee. The most likely outcome, a lengthy political battle. There will probably be hearings, there will probably be significant opposition, and if the legislation ever became law, there would almost certainly be legal challenges filed shortly afterward. Now, the reality is that major firearm legislation rarely moves quickly. Let's just be honest. But Trump's comments have unquestionably brought more attention to the issue. So what does this mean for gun owners? Whenever we cover legal stories on this channel, I think it's important to answer one simple question. What does this actually mean for you? What does this mean for me? Right now, nothing's changed. You still have to follow the laws in your state, no matter how corrupt they are. You still need any permits currently required by your state. You still have to comply with federal, state, and local firearm regulations. This proposal has not become law. However, if it were eventually enacted, it could significantly affect concealed carry permits, interstate travel, and future Second Amendment court battles. Now, for gun owners, this is definitely a story worth following. Now, my biggest takeaway isn't necessarily the bill itself. It's the fact that we're hearing discussion about nationwide constitutional carry from a sitting president. And if you just think back to a few years ago, that conversation would have seemed highly unlikely. Now, whether you support the proposal or oppose it, the fact that it is being openly discussed at this level shows how much the national firearms debate has changed. The question now is whether these comments turn into actual legislative action or remain simply another campaign promise. And that's what I'll be watching moving forward. Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think about this? Do you support nationwide constitutional carry? Should Americans be able to carry concealed firearms nationwide without obtaining a permit, or should each state continue setting its own carry requirements? Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this breakdown and you want more Second Amendment news, legal updates, and firearm legislation coverage, hit that subscribe button. Do me a favor and go ahead and hit that like button, turn on notifications, and thank you for watching. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.